Is it just me, or do people start celebrating Christmas early this year? Earlier than usual? I'm not talking about the usual suspects, like the folks at the mall who put up the tinsel and the Christmas tree just as they're putting away the vampire masks and discounting the leftover candy that didn't make their way into Halloween bags. And I'm not talking about the Christmas crazy neighbor who leaves his lights on 12 months of the year, regardless of the threats and the hostile phone calls. You expect that sort of stuff. I'm talking about folks who this year started blasting their Christmas music even before Remembrance Day, instead of a lot of folks starting December 1, while their neighbors flicked the lights on that same evening. Well, why can't we wait? What's the hurry? Why is Christmas such a big deal, even to those for whom Christmas is simply office parties, gifts, Santa Claus, and turkey? We say that Christmas is for children, but I think it's more about childlikeness than childhood. Even those who don't believe in Jesus, or don't know if they believe in Jesus, or wish they could believe in him, or those who want nothing to do with him, Christmas holds something special. But we have trouble saying exactly what that something is. And I think it's too easy to say that we're simply childhood nostalgia junkies, although I'm sure that's part of it. I've had some really good Christmases as a child that created memories that I treasure, and there's some Christmases that I would rather forget. But Christmas seems to be a cultural event that we couldn't escape even if we wanted to. And we celebrate whatever Christmas is in our own way. An article appeared recently in the New York Times describing a phenomenon that's happening in the United States, but it's something that we Canadians have known about for quite some time. And that is that Christmas is being celebrated less as a religious observance, where we hear Bible stories and sing Christmas hymns, and more of a cultural holiday, where Santa takes center stage rather than Jesus. And this has been happening for years, but someone finally put a name to it. And I could stand here and complain about how a sacred holiday is being co-opted by secular consumerism. I could preach a whole sermon on how our country's Christian roots are disappearing, not to other faiths coming to Canada, but by economics that places material prosperity as a moral imperative, which drives human behavior and personal moral choices. But that would be too easy and too glib, because that's not the whole story. Because underneath the cultural celebrations of Christmas that focus on presents and turkey, underneath all that is the impulse to hope. Christmas still has magic, even among those who don't recognize its religious backstory, because the spirit of the story is still there. It cannot be easily extinguished. And we know this because people still give more to charities at this time of year, and not just to minimize their tax burden. People volunteer this season to help those who are less well off than they are. People still associate giving with Christmas, even if they don't know the story from Luke chapter 2 or all the words to Silent Night. Our cultural memory is enduring, and the spirit of the Christmas message still resonates. And then for others, like those of us here who celebrate Christmas as a religious observance, still we have our own reasons for remembering our saving story of Jesus this night. Maybe we come to see the candles gently push away the darkness, or we come to listen to the calm and hushed silence. Maybe we come to bathe ourselves in the familiar songs, familiar carols, familiar stories, when everything in the world seems alien and out of control. A touch of nostalgia still caresses the edges of our Christmas celebrations. And that's not a bad thing. It's part of the story. Because when we are nostalgic for childhood, I don't think it's because childhood was such a fabulous time all around, but because we remember when the world was new and life brimmed with hope and expectation. Everything was magical and exciting. And for many of us, childhood reminds us of those times when our mistakes didn't seem to cripple us, when we were not too wounded to look forward to the next day, when tomorrow was always bright with possibility. And at Christmas, we return to those moments and see hope become new again, and to leave a jaded, cynical existence behind us, to see in the promise of a newborn child the promise made to our lives as well. And maybe Christmas started early this year because this year needed some good news. 2017 hasn't exactly been a stellar year, especially if you look through your news feeds and see reports of division and hatred among peoples being stoked, terrorism that tries to create a mood of fear and anger, climate catastrophes that devastated entire communities, economic challenges that make prosperity an uphill struggle for many, and the threat of nuclear war, which before 2017 was just theoretical, and yet now has become a very real possibility. And for many, it seems like humanity has taken a few steps backwards. Human progress doesn't seem as certain as it did a year ago, if human progress is measured by kindness and compassion. Or maybe we realize we're not as far advanced as we thought we were, if measured by a common sense of human unity, or maybe if just measured by basic human self-survival. At least that's how it seems for a lot of people. That's why for them, the Christmas music came on in October. Decorations were put up a few weeks earlier than usual, and the tree was pulled out of storage right after the Halloween candy disappeared. Many people needed a sense of hope, a feeling that there was still some goodness left in the world, that humanity isn't retreating from the goal of peace on earth and goodwill towards others. So people turn to the Christmas story. It may not be a conscious event, but people might have an intuitive sense that this story told at this time of year speaks to us in ways that we need, because the story we hear every day doesn't bring us the hope that sustains a troubled world. It's a story of love, born in a Bethlehem manger. It's a story of angels singing proclamations of salvation. It's a story of new life arriving in unlikeliest of places to the unlikeliest of people. And it's a story not of our own making. It's a story that comes to us from the deepest caverns of God's heart. Because if it was left up to us, what story would we tell? What would you do if you had to clean up the mess that we human beings have made? How would you deal with war, violence, sexual assault, political corruption? How would you handle fear of the future, destroyed relationships, or ravaging diseases? How would you solve the problem of terrorism, fanaticism, or fundamentalism? Would you send in the tanks? Would you break out the big guns? Would you launch the missiles? Would you stage a demonstration outside of City Hall protesting government policies? Would you picket outside of Starbucks, insisting they put the right words on their cup? Would you rally the troops, get out the vote, make sure your voice is heard? Or would you send a baby, a helpless child dependent on those he came to save? That doesn't sound like a smart move, does it? At least by any human standard. But that's the way God does things. Somehow in the worship of that child and in the celebration of his birth, hope becomes a present reality. Sometimes when we tell the Christmas story, we dwell on the power and the glory aspect, that we drain the flesh and the blood, which I think misses the whole point of what God is trying to tell us. I think the point of the story is hidden in the manger, reaching out for his mother's milk and soiling his diapers, whose newborn cries are God's unexpected response to our cries for help, our cries for healing, our cries for peace. It's like God is reaching down to us, tapping us on the shoulder to get our attention and saying, Just come look at the baby. And forget those things that keep you cut off from others. Forget your greed. Forget your pride. Forget your sin, your grief, your shame. Forget your failure, your illness, your loneliness. Come gather around the baby. In the birth of the newborn child, you too can be born once again. You too can be carried away in the care and love of this baby, for that's what God wants you to do. It is God's hope that in all the oohing and the aahing over this baby, that this child born in a manger, that we might learn to ooh and ah over all the babies in this world, and to ooh and ah over the big baby that's inside each one of us, wanting everything old and tired and stale to become fresh and new again. By pouring the wonder and glory into the baby Jesus and born in the middle of human brokenness, God invites us to see with new eyes, to see within each other and to see within ourselves the preciousness of life. Because life is always God's response to death. That is the heart of the Christian story. And that story begins and ends with new life. Through Jesus' birth, may you know that you have been born to give life to this world, so that you learn to see and to live the preciousness of life all around you and the holiness of God which is within you. Through Jesus' birth, may hope be born in you when the challenges of life cloud your eyes to the immense possibilities that surround you. Through Jesus' birth, may God's Spirit of love be born in you once again, reviving what is exhausted, restoring what has been lost, and renewing what has collapsed within you from seeing how precious and how holy you are, and how beloved the world is. And that's how God sees you, precious and holy. And in giving us the gift of Jesus to transform your vision, to renew your lives, and to breathe new life into our world, God invites you to see yourself and to see others as precious and holy as well. In the gift of the Bethlehem baby, and in the gift of all babies, God is telling us that God hasn't given up on the world, and neither should we. But in the gifts that help us contribute to the world's well-being, in the love that we give and the love we receive in return, and in the trust that God has given us, that God has given us what we need to create and recreate the life and the world that we and God long for, we become then beacons of hope. And that hope begins again in a Middle Eastern manger, born to a family who trusted that God is still being born in the midst of the world's mess. So maybe it's just me. Maybe people have always started the Christmas celebrations early, and I'm just noticing it now. But as I look back at it, if someone needs a message of newness and hope to fill the air in their house, then maybe it's never too early. Maybe it's something that God is asking us to do all the time, to remember Jesus and to tell his story, to remember that small, vulnerable child born in a barn. And in doing so, we remember that we are precious and we are holy, and that we are put on this planet to give and to receive love. Then God turns our eyes to see a beloved world that Jesus came to save. And may this be so among us. Amen.